Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at and discussing the new cloaking that is coming out in 3.7 update in the 14th of March with the first contact update that we are getting. Yeah, as long as you buy it, of course, so make sure you go out there and pre-order it. So although we can't look at the actual cloaking and how it works in game yet, I wanted to start a discussion on how it's going to affect fleet combat. And you've probably seen the dev diary, you've probably looked at Montu's video, maybe some other videos on the actual what was in the dev diary, but I wanted to delve a bit deeper into what is actually in the combat, how this is going to affect combat, and to get comments and feedback from you guys, because many hands make light work, so you guys probably get some ideas and stuff. And I know in my Discord channel, I've had a bit of discussion with a few people. Silas has made some comments about it, and a few others have made some comments about what could happen. So we know that cloaking early on, the first couple of levels, you're going to get the best cloaking out of corvettes, frigates, your science ships, the smaller ships. So, and this is representative of earlier game at the moment. So knowing that, in the first part of the game, frigates are going to be very powerful in terms of being able to get that alpha strike off with its torpedoes. So imagine, for instance, these two fleets here. We've got a fleet of cruisers. And these are just standard torpedo cruisers I've used in my other videos, all early tech. So imagine this fleet is, so there's a star base there, and this invading fleet of frigates is coming in. Now, let's assume this fleet has a cloaking generator here. So this fleet would be cloaked. It's just got torpedoes and disruptors to use once it closes range, because we can't really fire until we get to range 30. And we don't want to give away our position early by having missiles or a longer range weapon. So as we want to close range and fire with our torpedoes to do that multiplicative damage on the enemy. So the cruiser fleet here has no idea that this frigate fleet is here. So what I would do in this instance is I would probably sneak around the back of the enemy fleet. Probably something like this. Let's just unpause that, go around. Because what you need to remember is the enemy fleet has, with torpedoes, has an arc of fire, and a number of weapons have an arc of fire. So positioning becomes key. I'll just pause it there. So this cruiser fleet is now completely out of position. It's facing towards the sun, ready for combat. Its front end is facing away that way. So its torpedoes have a limited arc of fire out this way. It can't fire on these frigates this direction with its torpedoes. So the other weapons, being disruptors, yeah, they will probably be able to swing around pretty quickly and fire. So they will do significant damage to the frigates. But this is 80 frigates versus 20 cruisers, and they're going to get off the first shot with their torpedoes, slamming those cruisers, doing multiple damage, catching them out of position until they, once combat's engaged, and they'll start splitting up, turning around, or trying to probably... Have they got torpedo computers? Yes, they do. So they'll be trying to close the distance and use their torpedoes as well. So this could be very effective. And you may have more frigates in this. You might have 120 or something like that. So this could be a very effective strategy to use with someone who isn't using cloak, or you might have an early tech advantage with cloak on them with level 1 or level 2 cloak technology, whatever it may be, and they may not have those on their stations yet. So you can see how the arc of fire can really impact the ability to use cloak if they're using various weapons. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out in some of the PvP tournaments that we watch and games. Even against the AI, you'll be able to play some games with them. So the other thing you can do as well that I was thinking about in this instance is you could have, because when you have cloaking technology, you don't necessarily have to use it. You may have one fleet of cloaked frigates and then a second fleet of, say, destroyers or cruisers, if you've got them, with lots of armor and some other probably more close-in weapons to go and brawl with the enemy and tank their shots. So I assume there's another cruiser fleet here. He comes in, he starts engaging this guy. Maybe there's 10 cruisers. They come in, they start engaging this guy. He's fighting here. Meanwhile, your cloaked frigate fleets come in around behind the enemy and attacks him. He's completely out of position and just obliterates the enemy from behind. There can be destroyers. It could be destroyers, and you use frigates and come around. While there's not multiplicative damage is not as high versus destroyers, they're still very effective, the torpedoes, because their destroyer hull is obviously a lot less than a cruiser. So they still do a fair bit of damage, and in my previous videos they were very effective. So they would work good against destroyers. So this kind of strategy works very, very well against destroyers, cruisers, and beyond. If this fleet was a fleet of corvettes, that's where it becomes more difficult, because frigates are vulnerable to corvettes. Using mass torpedoes against corvettes, not a good idea. It doesn't work too well because of the corvettes' much higher evasion and speed, and particularly if they're equipped with disruptors, they're going to turn around and they're going to wreck those frigates. So it's probably not a good idea to use frigates if your enemy is going mass corvettes. And so corvettes could really come back into the game as a strategy to use early. If frigates become widespread in using of cloak, mass corvettes is the obvious early counter to that strategy, because it's cheap to build. You can equip them with disruptors, early disruptors. You could also, because with torpedoes obviously got the 100% shield penetration, 50% armor damage. So it's hard really to negate that. You could bump your armor up more, which is what I mostly do in my ship design. I normally put a lot more armor on than shields. Now, another factor you need to consider when you're using your cloak. Now, the early cloak has 100% shield nullification, and you also get 50% speed maulers. So your fleet's going to be slow to move. And when you engage in combat, and I'm assuming this because the devs talked about shield regen, and when you come out of a nebula, you don't instantly get your shields back. They have to do a slow recharge. So I imagine it's the same when you come out of cloak. This fleet here would come out of cloak, and it would have no shields. It would be recharging at the whatever the recharge rate of these shields are. So that means if you're up against an opponent with cloak, you want to make sure your fleet has more anti-armor weapons, because the enemy's shields are going to be practically nothing. So you want to use anti-armor to quickly tear into those that armor and whittle it down. Now, disruptors are great because disruptors do 100% armor penetration, so they bypass everything and go straight for the hull. So that's perfect. But if you haven't got disruptors, then you want to use things like plasma, lasers, those type of weapons, which will be really effective. So that's how I'm assuming it works that way, which would make logical sense. You wouldn't say instantly get back full shields if you're coming out of cloak. You'd think you'd have to build it up over a little bit of time. I could be wrong, but we'll see how it plays out. I'm assuming that would work that way, which could give the other player an advantage if they've designed their ships well. Now, using frigates would be very effective against, say, a starbase and defense stations as well. You could use the frigates. This station might be a bit too big, but for that level of frigate. But you could attack the enemy starbase, get a first alpha strike off with the torpedoes, and really do a lot of damage quickly and early, which would tip the balance in your favor if your fleet is heavily outnumbered. So you could end up with situations where fleets half the strength of a station are taking it down quite easily because of cloaking. That's if the station obviously doesn't have any cloaking technology to use against detecting the enemy's fleets. I can see a situation where you're going to have probably defense in depth, because we're not going to want to sacrifice too much of our defense on our stations. On your bordering station holding a key choke point, you still want to keep that station as strong as possible. So you might want to say, have a station here, for example. Assume that's a choke point. Have a station there, and then you might have your next system down, which is sort of behind your lines and safe. That might have another starbase, and that's got all the cloaking buildings on it, instead of your hangar bays and things like that. So you might have to sacrifice some anchorages or food buildings, whatever you like to build in your star bases, and build up some cloaking technologies detection, so that you don't get basically ambushed. You don't have also the science ships sneaking into your territory, building up intel, so then they can see exactly what your ship types are, what weapons you've got, and build directly how to counter it. That would be a disaster. Absolute disaster if your enemy's got cloaked fleets and their weapons are perfectly designed to counter your fleets, because you didn't have any cloaked defenses up and their science ships have been all over your empire, scouting everywhere, so they know your exact layout, they know where the stations are, they know you don't have any cloaking detection or very limited, and then it's all over Red Rover. Now, another strategy you could use if you don't want to give away your, say, your cloaking early, you might have one fleet that is going to storm in and take out this station. You think this enemy's got all his cloaking technology on his cloaking detection on his bordering station, so he's going to try and detect early game. It might be a couple hyperlane jumps to detect your cloaked fleet. So you've kept your cloaked fleet back, 4 or 5 systems towards the capital. Your other fleet, which is not a cloaked fleet, comes in. Might be a whole bunch of cruisers or a whole bunch of frigates just to try and go in and take out that station and destroy that station. So a lot of people aren't going to build a station there, a station there, a station there, station there, station there, station there, like a defense in depth, and have lots and lots of cloaking, because you can't afford to do that. You need star bases, you need anchorages, and you need other things in all your star bases. You can't just have cloaking detection. So by taking out this frontier station, which is likely has most of the cloaking detection on it, so your first fleet that doesn't use cloak comes in, you've gone to war, goes in there, does a first strike before the enemy can move his home fleet, probably from his capital, to defend that station. So you've taken out that station. Now he's lost that cloaking technology, or the cloaking detection. So unless he's got more cloaking detection on, say, his capital or other systems further in his empire, this whole region now, this whole sector, is vulnerable to using cloaked fleets. So now your second fleet comes through, it's cloaked, and it's looking to engage the enemy's main fleet. If your fleet here, it's probably a bit damaged as a secondary backup if needed. The enemy still doesn't know you have a cloaked fleet, so you could charge this fleet in. It's maybe a little bit damaged from fighting the station. It's coming through. Your enemy's moving his fleet forward, thinking, "Yeah, I've got this guy. He's an easy prey now. He thinks he's gung ho. He's going to take all my stuff. I can outmatch him." So the enemy comes in, tries to engage your fleet. While he's trying to engage your non-cloaked fleet, your cloaked fleet positions around behind him and ambushes him from behind when he engages your first fleet, just like we talked about earlier in the video. So I can see there's going to be a lot of interesting tactics that could be used with taking out those key star bases. And if you can get your intel and see on those star bases what they've actually got there, that's going to be very, very useful to see if they've actually got cloaking technology. But if they've got cloaking detection on there, your science ship, I imagine, would be detected. It would be decloaked, so you'd probably realise that, no, this guy's got cloaking. So it may not be as effective unless your technology is superior, unless you're getting up to, you might be a psionic race and you've got up to level 6 cloaking and they're way behind. I know some of the games I play, like I haven't played Psionic much. I have in one of my last games I've been playing Psionic. But if you have psionic cloaking, the psi cloaking device, plus psionic shields, that is extremely powerful, because you have your full shields. You don't get any shield nullification whatsoever. So you have your cloaking, you're going to decloaked or first strike, and you've got your first shields up. The whole shield is up with psionic shields. So if your enemy has gone more anti-armor weapons, thinking it'll be a good counter to cloak, wrong. You've got your full shields, and there's psionic shields, which are very powerful. So a lot of his weapons are going to struggle to get through your shields unless they're bypass weapons. So that's something else to consider. Psionic may become significantly more powerful, and with subterfuge getting a buff with the intel side of things, and also with cloaking detection, that's also going to become another tradition which is very powerful. Now, something else we need to talk about is star bases are obviously going to become even more important now. So this may affect what traditions you're going to pick or ascension perks you're going to pick early, because we're going to need more star bases, because you want some star bases to act as cloaking detection rather than reducing your ability to deploy fleets having your naval capacity, or you might be using too many pops, to convert too many pops to farmers if you've got hydroponic bays and things like that on your star bases. So using our traditions, you might want to consider using some of the other ascension perks, or getting more stations early. Something like unyielding might become something which is used early. +2 starbase capacity there, and it's going to help with your starbases there. So another +2 there, so you got +4. And I'm not sure if any of these ascension perks are affected by the first contact update. So unyielding could become a very powerful tradition because it gives you +4, which would be really good to helping you to build star bases specifically for cloaking. That's something you can really look at early. Let's just do another. Oh, I've got the ascension perk already. Okay, there we go. Grasp the Void +5. FTL travel technologies appear at 1.5 times. Okay, so you can see if you did unyielding and you pick Grasp the Void, +9 star bases, bang. So that's probably overkill, particularly early on. But if you've got a big sprawling empire, those 9-star extra star bases may be very important to you to back up your key choke point defense stations, and to put a nice cloaking detection grid around your empire on your border. And then you might have a couple further inland as well, or more in the central part of your empire, maybe around things like wormholes, L gates. You might need to consider those type of things. So if the enemy, once the L gate gets open, obviously they then have the ability to sneak in science ships to all the other areas where you've got L gates and get around that way. So remember to protect your L gates as well. So I think that's really going to change up the normal build pattern of maybe going prosperity and supremacy and discovery and things like this early. You might want to go unyielding, and you might want to go subterfuge and things like this. So it's really going to shake up the traditions you do. So you need to start thinking about that as well, and looking at that when you get first contact. So this video was basically designed just to start the conversation about what's going to happen with cloaking and how we can use it effectively. Now, we're not obviously going to be experiment until we get our actual hands on the game with the first contact update. But frigates are going to be powerful early. I can see cruisers being very powerful early using cloaking. Cruisers are one of my favorite ships anyway, because they're very versatile. You can use them as torpedo ships, you can use them as artillery ships, you can use them as basic carriers, things like that, with the strike craft. I really love cruisers till much later in the game. Now, it is possible with, I think it's with ascension perks, and I think it might be, might have psionic or a Pacific tradition or civic. But it is possible to get battleships up to level 8 cloaking, because the maximum you can get is level 10, and that's with all the buffs basically possible that you can get in the game. But getting battleships up to level 8, that would be extremely powerful, because you imagine you have battleships. Imagine having battleships and you've got your X-class weapons on there, and you do opening alpha shot with a whole fleet of battleships, X-class weapons, and then you might have a whole range of artillery, kinetic artillery, or it could be torpedoes, long-range torpedoes on there, your neutron torpedoes. Well, you can't have torpedoes in the battleship, so scratch that. But on your cruisers, you could. But you can have kinetic artillery and the excellent alpha shot, just firing away the enemy. That's just going to be a bad day. The only thing is the speed. You want to make sure you got some good engine technologies, or maybe some afterburners and things to help out your speed if you're using cloaked ships. So another reason why afterburners is probably one of the most important technologies we've seen in some of the recent tournaments with Montu and multiplayer madness. The speed of ships was crucial. So afterburners, another reason for that is that's gonna boost up your speed with Cloaked Fleet. So another reason to do afterburners. Don't neglect afterburners. So cloaked battleships, once you get later in the game, yeah, that could be very effective. I still think cruisers is going to be one of the most effective because it's a good balance. And just doing that huge torpedo alpha strike when you get devastated torpedoes and things like that, that's going to be really, really good. But later in the game too, people are going to have more cloaking detection and things like that. But it's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out, really. I'm very keen to see how it's going to affect the fleet combat. And, you know, I like testing fleet combat, so I'm going to be really playing around at that when that comes out with First Contact. I'm really interested in that, and how with all the FTL primitives, pre-FTL, that's going to be really good too. We're planning on starting a multiplayer game and just playing all of us using pre-FTL civilizations, so that should be really good. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, I'll end the video here. Please leave some comments and give me your ideas and suggestions, what you think. I'm sure there's plenty of things I haven't thought about. This is just to start the conversation, and we'll go from here over the next few weeks when we get our hands over the game and can do some testing. So yeah, throw me your ideas so I can start testing them when we get our hands on First Contact. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.